Hey, everybody, this is Craig Garber. Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar. And man, we've got a great guest with us today with Steve Gorman from the Black Crowes. A little backstory to this about like before COVID, maybe 3 or 4 months before COVID, Greg Martin from the Kentucky Headhunters was here in Tampa, and we went to grab something to eat. Greg's a big record collector, so we went to some used record stores out in St. Pete, and he sees this book right here. So if you're listening, I'm holding up Steve's book. It's called, the official title is Steve Gorman, Hard to Handle, The Life and Death of the Black Crowes, a memoir. And we see the book in the record store. He goes, have you read that book yet? I said, no. He goes, you've got to read it, and you've got to get Steve Gorman on your show. So, you know, Greg's a good guy. Listen to him, take him seriously. So from that point on, I had my eyes open to try to get Steve on the show. Fortunately, last couple of months ago, Warner E. Hodges, thank you, Warner, for connecting us, was kind enough to put us together. And here we are. If you are not familiar with this book, it is a phenomenal book. It's a great read. You know, let me get into this, and then we'll talk about everything. Quick announcements. Make sure you go to everyonelovesguitar.com/subscribe. Subscribe to the show. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon. That helps us with the YouTube algorithm. Background on Steve in the book and how he got here. Steve's best known as the drummer of the Black Crowes. He also spent time touring with the Welsh band Stereophonics, and he was a sideman playing on albums by Warren Zevon, Jack Casady, Ian Thornley, who we had here on the show, and others. He's currently a member of Trigger Hippie, a band whose members are mostly from Nashville. He also hosted his own radio show, Steve Gorman Sports, on Fox Sports Radio, and he currently has a radio show called Steve Gorman Rocks, which you can find stevegormanrocks.com. It's 7 p.m. to midnight, Monday through Friday on Westwood One. So in 2019, Steve released this book about his life and times with the Black Crowes. Again, the book is called Hard to Handle, The Life and Death of the Black Crowes. Really well written, both in terms of the events surrounding the Crowes and in terms of Steve sharing his own personal experiences and his own internal monitor. At first blush, after reading this book, or while you're reading this book, it'd be really easy to sit and say, you know, wow, Chris and Rich Robinson are like the most narcissistic, greedy, dysfunctional, immature, and self-sabotaging human beings you've ever read about. Okay. And I'm sure we could go through chapter by chapter and validate that if you go through the book. But what I liked is there's another very cool story running throughout this book, and that's what we're going to talk about with Steve today. And to me, it's a feel-good story of Steve's own personal growth and how he came to realize certain things about himself and about things in relationships he was willing to accept and not accept. And also understanding codependency, which is a very common trait amongst a lot of us, and how that trait plays a role in his life. He's really kind to be sharing some of this with us, and we're all going to get something out of this. So thank you very much, and I apologize for that long-winded introduction.
Hey, that's okay. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Greg and Warner, who I did hire as, you know, people don't think of them as PR agents, but, you know, they are publicists, PR, marketing, whatever you need. GregandWarner.com. Check it out.
Right on, man. All right, so I just want to get this out of the way so the listeners can understand some of the unnecessary bullshit that you had to put up with. In the book, Steve, you made a great analogy. You said being in a band with Chris Robinson was like sharing a house with an arsonist. Every waking moment was spent putting out potential fires that threatened to burn up the rest of us. If you're comfortable, I'm just going to ask you about 2 incidents in particular, because I think that these incidents are pretty good at setting the framework for what you had to deal with day in and day out for 15 years. And let's start with ZZ Top firing the Black Crowes.
Yeah, it's to your point, it's illustrative of the kind of things that were going on in real time, and that it's real easy to see everything, obviously, with 30 years of hindsight. And in the moment, and part of what I was trying to get across in the way the book was written was, in the moment, you're just holding on for dear life constantly to these things. And another thing before I get into that story, to your points about what the book is really about, one thing I've heard from a ton of people, and this is very gratifying, is it's a very different book on the second read. For people who've gone back and done it twice, they pick up on all the things you're talking about. And I think the stuff that you initially picked up on, because I didn't write the book to illustrate or blow anybody else up. And I don't hold things that I don't hold who people are against them. Everyone's who they are. Everyone does the best they can.
Yeah.
The definitions of what that, even the word best means, vary from person to person.
Absolutely.
So it's, you know, I never wrote the book, or I never saw the book like it's some salacious tell-all. It's just my story. And these things all happened. That said, yeah, there was a lot of moments where, you know, as an overview, you know, it's not just about Chris, it's about every member of the band. What a band does to get noticed and to break out of the pack at any time in their career, you have to have a certain attitude. There's got to be a certain sense of nothing else matters. And that's a positive thing in any endeavor. That, you know, putting your shoulder to the wheel and pushing with all you have is very important. And what often happens with rock bands more than in other creative pursuits, or maybe not more often, but they're certainly glorified more often, is that the people that are willing to do that are also willing to ignore a lot of other parts of their life. They're also willing to ignore a lot of other people's feelings. You know, we're all guilty of that to some extent. And I, you know, so that, you know, I approached it from a lot of, we all did these things. We all had different roles in the same story. The ZZ Top thing, though, is a great illustration of Chris running the band into a corner that we had no interest in being in. We didn't necessarily disagree with him, but it's the kind of thing where, you know, it was essentially a wildcat strike. It's like, wait, we're a union and you're striking? You didn't tell us first? You know, it was one of those. That's how it felt. Like,
yeah.
Hey, we're supposed to all do this together. And the simple version is that we were on a tour in 1991. It was our debut album had come out and it had already gone platinum. So it was a year of nonstop touring and promotion, and MTV was hammering us and rock radio was hammering us. And it took about a year to sell 1 million records. But then we went out on this tour with ZZ Top and we were selling 1 million records a month for a few months there. It just exploded. And so with that as the backdrop and context, this tour with ZZ Top was sponsored by Miller Lite. As most giant arena tours are and have been for decades now. We never thought twice about that. That was not something that the Black Crowes ever discussed. It wasn't our tour. It was ZZ Top's tour. We're just the opening act. We're just going out for 45 minutes. And the ticket could have said brought to you by anything. We didn't care. It had nothing to do with us. We got a flat fee. We were hired by ZZ Top and their management to do this tour. That was as far as it went with us. This entire episode blew up where we were the band that decried corporate sponsorship, and the Black Crowes planted a flag against all corporate interest in rock and roll. The whole reason it even started was because an interview that Chris gave was totally botched. Someone asked him, because he was 6'2" and weighed 120 pounds, jokingly, so I guess you drink light beer. That was a joke. And Chris said, no, man, light beer sucks. I like real beer. When the interview was printed, the word light was spelled L-I-T-E as opposed to L-I-G-H-T. L-I-T-E is a brand name, Miller Lite. Right. That was the sponsor of the ZZ Top tour. It's in Us Weekly or People or one of those. It wasn't even a music magazine. It was like a news, you know, like a grocery store rag.
Yeah.
Said Chris Robinson says light beer sucks, as in Miller Lite. So that's the basis of, that's how this whole thing started. Suddenly, the tour manager for ZZ Top says to Chris, hey, man, where do you get off ragging our sponsor? And Chris has no idea what the guy's even talking about because, of course, an offhanded comment he made about something else 2 weeks earlier, it's not on his mind. When we figure out what happened, as opposed to trying to explain, dude, that's not what I said, that's a whatever, Chris, of course, took the attitude of, who are you to tell me what to do? I'll say whatever I want. And for the record, we were totally cool with that. I mean, we're a young rock band and we are trying to be up. We're trying to make our way and we are looking around and thinking about all the hurdles that are in front of us. And it's like, man, we'll kick anybody in the balls if they get in our way. It was just that simple.
Sure.
So initially this didn't have anything to do with any big picture issue. It was just, don't tell me to shut up, dude. That's Chris Robinson. Right. And for the record, the Black Crowes are 100% aligned behind that.
Yes.
So he, of course, took it to the stage and started saying from the stage every night, the Black Crowes are brought to you by the Black Crowes. We don't need a beer company to tell us what to play and how to play it. And again, I'm sitting at the drum kit the first time he says it, and I'm like, hey, right on, man. You know, it's just all the vibe of it. Okay. In no place in my mind is this an actual issue. It's just what he's railing on that night. And, you know, there's 12,000 people in whatever arena it is, and they don't even know what he's really talking about, but they all roar because it's just about the vibe. They see a young kid in a young band, and they're basically flipping off the man. Is what that was. And so, of course, that's cool. It's like, yeah, hell yeah. And it took off from there. So we walk off stage, and we're told by members of the ZZ Top world, not the band members themselves, of course, they have nothing to do with this. We're told by them, hey, you know, or Chris is told, don't ever say that again. This is a business, blah, blah, blah. And so he escalates that. So it just takes a life of its own. So every night, Chris is getting on stage and pushing that more and more, decrying the whole idea of corporate sponsorship. And how un-rock and roll is it to have a giant multinational conglomerate putting their name on all your tickets and T-shirts? You know, screw you. And so it just came to a head where ZZ Top at some point said, if you say anything from the stage again, you're fired. And again, management said that Billy Gibbons and Frank Beard and Dusty Hill, they couldn't care. I'm sure they didn't even know it was happening.
Right.
They were always totally cool. The whole story in the book that's the thing that so there was we ended up ultimately being fired from the tour. The story that I tell in the book, because everything I've just told you is kind of already out there, the story in the book tells the story of how we got fired, which is it was engineered by our manager, Pete Angelis. It was a masterstroke because he looked at every situation, good and bad, and said, in his mindset, everything is an opportunity. The worst news you ever have is an opportunity if you just think about how to spin it or use it or be incentivized by it or be motivated by it. So when this was all blowing up, Pete just looked at the landscape and said, okay, my band is out. This is the biggest tour in the country right now. We're the opening act. We're matching ZZ Top in merch sales some nights, which is incredible to imagine. Yeah. Our record is selling. We had days on that tour where we sold 100,000 copies in a day. You know, we're selling 1 million a month easily. You know, we go from 1 million to 4 million in a matter of weeks. It's just have that brief period of time over 2 months where everything we had spent a year building just exploded. So with that as the backdrop, we're about to go do Saturday Night Live. Rolling Stone is going to do yet another feature on the band. We're doing a 3-night stand in our hometown at the Omni in Atlanta. The Conquering Heroes returning 3 nights on the biggest tour in the country as the opening act. And Pete looked at that, all those things happening within a 2-week window, and said, hang on, if they're going to fire us, let's get all we can out of this. Like, let's make sure they fire us when we want to be fired.
Right.
And so, you know, again, I don't want to be too long-winded, but he said, we got Rolling Stone's going to be at the Omni in Atlanta. All the local Atlanta TV stations and the newspaper, there's going to be a cover story on the paper that day. We're going to be on the front page of the AJC. The local news affiliates will be there. I mean, it's the biggest band out of Atlanta since the Georgia Satellites, you know, what was that, 87? So it's 4 years after Keep Your Hands to Yourself. And there's great bands from Atlanta that had record deals and stuff, but they hadn't had a breakthrough hit for a rock band from the scene like we were at that moment. So it's a big deal. And Pete booked the brothers to go on Rockline, which was a nationally syndicated,
of course,
you know, 2-hour interview show on hundreds of rock stations all across America. I think it was a Monday. It was the second of the 3 nights in Atlanta. So I mean, literally, we play the first. So for a couple of weeks, Chris stops talking from the stage. He doesn't say a word about sponsorship. And about a week before Atlanta, Pete says, hey, Chris, say something tonight. Let's just see how they react. He says something, and then they throw down the gauntlet. The guy from the tour says, if you say one more word about sponsorship, you're fired. And that's all we needed. It was like, okay, hold on, wait for the second night in Atlanta. So it was all planned out. And the truth is, there's even more elements to this. We've been on the road nonstop for over a year at this point. We had one headlining tour in clubs. Everything else was opening for other bands. And we were truly chafing under the 45 minutes a night. By this point, we were ready to go play. Right. We wanted to go up and get 90 minutes to 2 hours a night. And we were more than capable of selling out theaters on our own. So we were ready. We still had a couple months on this ZZ Top tour that we had committed to. And, you know, there's all these other elements at play, or all these various elements at play. And one of them was we were done opening. We were just ready to be our own band. So with that in mind, we wait till the second night at the Omni. Chris gets on stage, says his thing. hey, it's so great to be in our hometown. The actual quote, I think, is in the book. And he says, this is a dream come true to play the Omni. And it's 12,000 Atlantans or people from the area. So they're just, we got them in our pocket. You know what I mean? They're just loving us. And then he goes on this rant, and the roof just blows off the place. It's just like, yeah, that's my band, man. And we walk off stage, and the first words Chris hears is, "You're fired." I mean, it's it. They bounce us from the tour. And then 2 hours later, Chris and Rich are on 200 rock stations talking about what a bunch of sellouts ZZ Top is and how they let the corporate sponsor fire us. And we're the coolest thing in the world. And the funny thing about this is every music journalist in America took our side. It's like, yeah, hey, real rock and roll. Let the music speak for itself. And it's not to say that we didn't all have those feelings and thoughts, but the whole thing, the master plan was simply in how to get ourselves out of the situation. That we walked into a situation blind, swinging wildly because our singer was accused of saying something he didn't, but then his response to that was to say, "Well, go fuck yourself." You know what I mean? So it's a great example of how the band themselves can back themselves into a corner. B, if you have the right manager, he can get you out with momentum. And then C, a few years later, everyone forgets the real story and takes credit for things they either did or didn't do. It's like, in all of that, I mean, it's kind of a funny story, and it's certainly the most press the band ever got. I mean, the Rolling Stone feature story suddenly was a cover story because of that. You know what I mean? When we got fired, David Frick from Rolling Stone was standing right there. Now, if you're a music writer, and you are a young band that's taken over the world, literally, you're standing there when they get fired from the biggest arena tour in the country. You're like, no one gets to see that stuff happen. You know what I mean? So yeah, it was truly just a masterful. It wasn't engineered. Like I said, it wasn't from the jump planned out that way. It was if anything, it's the great example of the value of Pete Angelus to the Black Crowes, because he took a shitty situation and completely spun it into gold. It was the most press the band ever got in our career. We never had more attention at one moment in our life than that and the immediate aftermath. And then, of course, during the few weeks before that happened, he and our agent had already been laying out a whole theater tour, and we announced, we got like a few weeks off, and then this was all in March, and then I think early we were out headlining theater. We were out or late April, in fact. So it was all planning behind the scenes that led to us getting a break, which we desperately needed for a few weeks, and then B, going out and finally being a headlining act.
Which worked out great. And you paint such that's the picture that I got of Pete. What a really smart, calm, well thought guy. He seemed to be a great example of not reacting, of thinking.
His entire life is being proactive. He hates to react. He wants to be 3 steps ahead of everything. And, and I certainly share my thoughts in the book about Pete and how much he did for the band. He's also as creative a guy as I've ever known in any realm. He can design lights, he can direct videos. He has a great ear, not necessarily, he's not a musician, but he certainly, he's a guy that when we did take his notes on little things like a song, you play him a track, and because he's just a music fan as opposed to a musician, the slightest thing like, oh, I wish that chorus just had a little more lift. And we would roll our eyes and go, "You're the manager, don't worry about it." But then the next day, hey, there's a horn section in there. You know what I mean? It's like there were a lot of things like that as well. If Pete ever made any mistakes along the way that anyone else thinks or that he would own up to, or that I could look back and say, yeah, that wasn't the best move, they're so few and far between that literally none come to mind. And it would be absurd to think that anybody's perfect all the time, but I don't have any. I've never spoken to a musician who spent time around the Black Crowes that didn't say at some point, like, God, man, all I ever wanted was a guy like Pete. What must it be like to know that your life and your career are literally being managed by somebody who's going to outwork even the artist? And that's what Pete did.
Yeah, and under the circumstances, man, he's got the patience of a saint.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, he's very, very committed and focused guy. And it takes nothing away from the band ever. It doesn't take, I never thought it took anything away from the band to give credit to George Drakoulias, who helped us find our sound and produced us. It certainly doesn't take anything away from the band to give credit to Pete or any of the producers, any of the record company execs that pushed buttons. It takes a ton of people all working their ass off to make anybody a success, and it doesn't mean the band's also not fantastic, but we can count on all of our hands and toes and the number of great artists that never break through. I mean, most
absolutely.
of my favorite bands are not giant, hugely successful bands. I love the Beatles, I love the Stones, I like all the big boys. I love Wilco. They've had a nice career there, but they didn't have some breakout huge album,
right?
Whether they wanted it or not. I mean, I'm just thinking of band names, but there's, for every band that makes it, and by making it, I mean literally every band that's paying their bills by playing music. That's what making it as a musician really comes down to.
Yeah.
There's, we talked about Warner Hodges. I'm the biggest Jason and the Scorchers fan. I'm as big a fan as anybody.
Yeah.
And everybody that knows music knows how giant their shadow is. The influence of Jason and the Scorchers on everything we now call alt country. You know what I mean? Like, it goes back 40 years to a bunch of punks in Nashville who also like country music. But they never got their due. All their career is one of just countless frustrations and missed opportunities. They didn't have Pete Angelis, and we did.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I want another story. The CROWES were touring with Jimmy Page, and by the way, you did a great job. You did a great job articulating the vibe that you and Jimmy, your relationship with him. It was very like tender, presented really well like that. And it was not, it was just very sincere. I thought it was really cool. But you guys were touring with Jimmy Page. You had an amazing tour plan. And then Jimmy abruptly leaves the tour, supposedly because he had back pain. Now, it was funny, when I was reading the book, I wrote a note, because I knew coming up in the interview, I said, did you ever find out why Jimmy Page left?
Yeah.
And then you do the reveal at the end. And Jimmy never discusses this with anybody. If you could talk about why Jimmy left the tour, because when you gave the reveal for that, it blew my mind. And again, I thought that was a classic example of some of the shit that you had to put up with, or that,
well, it's important to note that Jimmy did have a bad back. I mean, that's not it all made up or created. I mean, I saw him the day before he actually left, or 2 days before he left. He was in tremendous pain. He had someone come work on him and felt much better and much freer. And in fact, it was only once he felt good that we all recognized how bad he had felt, if that makes sense. Like, you see a guy who's like, oh, the weight of oh my God, this is amazing. And then you're like, oh shit, I haven't seen that look in his eye in a while. Like, he was really carrying around a load. That said, and he did need a procedure, and he had been putting it off because we were in the middle of this tour and it was going really well and he was having a great time. And I think that he was also very aware of the impact that our association had on the fortunes of the Black Crowes. When I say fortunes, I don't mean literal fortunes. I mean, we went from the summer of 1999 being, commercially anyway, dead in the water without a lot of options. Promoters were not loving us. Our fifth album had come and gone, and it was every album from number 1 through 5 sold less than the one before it, which is exactly the opposite you hope for. So our fifth album sold even less than our fourth album, which had been considered a complete disaster in, culturally speaking, like on the consensus view. Like, we had fans that were staying by our side no matter what, and that's great. But the general vibe on the Black Crowes was, well, that was pretty great, and it's over, which a decade is normal for a lot of rock bands.
Totally.
And so from the backdrop of that, summer of 99, looking at it going, well, we're kind of done here, to then Jimmy saying, let's do some shows together. Within 6 shows in the fall of 99, suddenly we're the hottest rock band of our generation again. Every label is lining up to sign us. And it's funny to think about. It's like we had to go play Led Zeppelin songs to remind people that we're a fucking great band. You know what I mean?
And you tell that story so well in the book. It was great.
And
it was good.
But and Jimmy was well aware of So the follow-up, so then a live album comes out, and that's got all sorts of attention. And so that all started in the fall of 99. By the summer of 2000, we have put together a 55-date, tour, North America, Europe, and Asia, 5 legs of a tour. And at this point, we're at the place where Jimmy's really suffering and dealing with some serious back pain. So, and again, this is all much longer, detailed, laid out in the book. We had a day off in Los Angeles, and then we performed on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno that was on a Monday. And then Tuesday we were going to play down in Orange County at a shed down there. So we go to the Tonight Show on a Monday afternoon. We do the Wanton song from Physical Graffiti. Jimmy sits with Jay Leno and Chris and Rich maybe on the panel afterwards. And Jay says, tomorrow night, whatever the venue is called. They're on tour all year. Here's the live album. Great to have you. It's just a TV hit. No big deal. We walk off the stage. I go back up to the green room, and our manager, Pete, calls me out into the hallway, and he says, Jimmy's going home. And I thought that meant Jimmy's going to the hotel. I'm like, yeah, cool. Great. Why would he hang around Burbank another 5 minutes? And Pete says, no, he's going home. He's on his way to the airport. The tour's over. It was just that abrupt. Like, this is 10 minutes after we've just hit the last downbeat of the Wanton song on NBC, And I was so bewildered. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, it's his back. It's just, he's got to go have this surgery, and he just can't do it anymore. And I said, are we rescheduling? And Pete's like, no, it's over. He said, Amy, who was our manager, Amy Finkley, goes, Amy's on the phone right now with promoters and the agents and everybody involved to make this happen. And it's done. He's gone. And, it was just astonishing. Like, in the midst of this, we're 11 shows into 55 shows, and the momentum is crazy and the shows are great. And, that was just such a staggering moment for me, just because it was real simple. I was having such a blast. I mean, I was having so much fun. The brothers Robinson were down the hall. Pete called them over, let them know, and Chris shook it off pretty quick. He was like, well, damn, okay. And he said, I'm ready to be the Black Crowes again anyway. Okay, whatever. I mean, we did. It's funny because of this thing with Jimmy, we did have a brand new record deal, and we had a new record to make. It's like, well, at least we, okay, well, we have to go put it down together. I mean, it's not like we don't have stuff to do. And then Rich Robinson didn't say a word. He just stood there completely silent. And I said to Pete a little later that day, I said, which one of those two do you think did something? Like, right away, I thought somebody pissed Jimmy off. I mean, something had to have happened. And I'm half joking and half thinking, and this is probably what really went down. And Pete said, I don't know, but I'm sure as hell going to find out. Like, he had the same thought. Well, nothing ever came of it. I mean, the tour ended. We all go home. 3 months later, or a month later, we're writing songs. And by the end of the year, this happened in August, and by Christmas, we had an album in the can. Right. So we got real busy. A year and a half after this incident happened, the Black Crowes had released an album, toured for an album, decided to take a lengthy hiatus. I decided to quit the band. So from the summer 2000, when Jimmy Page walks away, to the end of 2001, we've been incredibly busy and done an awful lot of things. And at the very end of that, I said, okay, that's it. I'm out. I'm done. I've had enough of this. 2 months after that, I fly to London, and I see Jimmy for the first time in 18 months. And we sit together, just the two of us, and he tells me at some point, he's very happy to see me. We're catching up. It's all very positive. And he goes, it's such a shame that the tour had to end that way. And he said, would you like to know what else happened? And I said, I literally, and this is like the way you and I are right now. I'm sitting in a small room, and we're face to face, and my heart sank and my stomach just dropped. But I said, yeah. And so again, that's all. The long version of this is in the book, but he told me a story of having a conversation with Rich where he offered himself for the following album. Back in 2000, he spoke to Rich the day before Jay Leno and said, if you guys are going to go in the studio for this new record, it's important that it get everyone's attention again. You got to take advantage of this momentum. And if there's anything I can do to help, let me know. I'd happily play a guitar solo on it. I might produce a track. I don't want to produce the whole album. And Rich said, okay, cool. And Jimmy said, but what I was thinking, I've got a bunch of pieces. I've got some riffs and stuff I was trying to write with Robert, but he never really got involved. I have these ideas. Maybe you, me, and Chris sit down and finish them. And if any of those songs work, you could have that song, and we'll just have all three of our names on. We'll write a song together. Wow. And this is just Jimmy Page extending himself beyond this tour. And Rich said, no, we're cool, man. Thanks. But the songs that me and Chris have right now, it's our best group of songs ever. We're totally cool. And I know Rich didn't say that, like, piss off Jimmy Page. He was probably very polite in saying no. But what he missed was the idea that when somebody that's giving you this, forget that it's Jimmy Page, anybody that's doing so much for your career, anybody that's helped you single-handedly turn things around, and then is simply offering help, to say no it's a really bizarre thing in any situation in life. When it is Jimmy Page and when you're Rich Robinson, it makes even less sense. And I think that I don't want to put words in Jimmy's mouth. He did say, I know who I am. I know what I meant. I know what my value to you guys was. And I just couldn't believe that answer. And I think up until that point, Jimmy had rationalized all of these things, why it was worth it to play through the pain. And chief among those was, I'm doing, this is helping these guys that I've always respected and admired. He was a fan of our band.
Wow. From
the minute we met him, he was nothing but supportive. He was our biggest cheerleader. And I think that he loved having a hand in helping us turn our trajectory around. And why wouldn't you? I mean, he was proud to be able to do that for us. And he knew how much we appreciated it, or at least some of us did.
Yeah,
I think that simple conversation, maybe in Rich's eyes, it just unraveled all of the things Jimmy had sort of sewn together as why it's worth going out here and killing myself every night on stage. Now, he was enjoying the shows. He loves to play music. He loves to play Led Zeppelin music. He had a kick-ass band behind him that was full of that was just driving it. But that was just it's a real kick in the nuts, when you've done as much as he did. So that just sort of ended it for him. Now, he did go home and he did have a back procedure and he did have to rehab and he had to do all these things. And that led to him turning everything around in his life. Now, we didn't talk about this, but it's not a secret. That's when he got sober. That's when he, if you saw Jimmy Page in the summer 2000 and you saw him again a year later, he looked 10 years younger.
Wow.
The back had been a long time coming. He got that fixed. He got his health back together. He's looked great for 20 years. You know what I mean? He let his hair grow gray. He looks awesome.
Yeah.
And so he was holding on. I think he was just having a good time playing with a young band it was just a really, and it came together so organically. It was just a blast. And then I think what happened was he just realized, like, well, I'm out here killing myself, and this guy doesn't even appreciate that. And it's funny because I've done a lot of book events, and I've talked with CROWES fans, and people have said to me flat out, they're like, "What's the big deal? He had some riffs laying around." And I said that's not the point. I never once in my mind. To me, it has nothing to do with what may have happened musically. I don't even think about that. I know very well how much a great riff doesn't mean you have a great song. I know that a great performance doesn't mean it translates if the vocal's not there. There's a million things that go to making a song memorable, and a bunch of great riffs, that's just one piece. So I never thought in myself, oh my God, we would have had a great song with Jimmy Page. I never even thought of it in those terms. It's just to me, it's about gratitude and appreciation, and it's a very human story that was mangled, and a fine example of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory yet again.
Yeah, I mean, how many people does Jimmy Page say, "Hey, look, I'd love to mentor you guys over the course of your next record"?
And the other thing, and again, I'll tell you something else.
I got it.
I'll tell you something else that was really that was galling for Pete Angelus specifically, because Pete had mentioned to Jimmy that we had this new record deal. He knew about it. And he said, Jimmy, man, we would love to have, if there's anything you want to be a part of it. And Jimmy took that, great.
Wow.
And Pete even Pete said to us, hey, I told Jimmy, it shouldn't have taken Rich by surprise. I know this, I can say this. If he had said that to me, I would have said, awesome, great, thank you. That's all you say.
Right.
And in fact, so would have Chris. Chris would have said, man, anytime you want to pull out the guitars and throw some ideas together, let's go, because Chris would have been excited to do that. And Chris, even, you know, in with all of his proclivities, Chris certainly would have understood person to person. You don't just look at Jimmy Page and say no to anything. We're talking about something that wouldn't have happened until the following year.
Yeah.
You know, if you're actually thinking about it in a linear fashion, and you're thinking, I don't want to be in a studio with Jimmy, I want to make my own record again, the answer is still, that's awesome, thank you so much. And then you let Pete fix it. I mean, it's just all these things, you know. Yeah. And so at the time when I heard that story from Jimmy, and I do this in the book, I wrote a lot of the book in the mindset at the time. And I was furious. I mean, I was, for all the things I've just explained, I was the angriest I probably ever got in my life about any one thing. It just, and I'd already quit the band. So I had no recourse. There was nothing I could do. I was like, shit, I already quit the band before I found out, because this would have been something to quit the band over.
Yeah. Let me ask you something about, if you're comfortable answering it, because I don't know how this works. When you write a book describing your personal experience, right? Is there any, and it says things that are unflattering to about somebody else. Mm-hmm. Is there like, is there like, you know, recourse? How does that work? I just like,
well, it's very important that you don't write anything that can't be confirmed. You know, there's nothing in that book that I don't have multiple other people who would stand in a courtroom and put their hand on a Bible and say, yes, this is how I saw this happen.
Okay.
There are also, you know, it is unflattering of people. And it's funny because it's very unflattering about me at times too.
Well, I can see how you would find it unflattering.
Yeah, the values that I aspire to, and that I hold, and that I aspire to live to, it's very unflattering at times. I mean, my greatest moments in life happen in this band, as well as all my greatest weaknesses and the times I turn my back on myself and other people. But that said, I guess there's legal recourse, but you know, I don't think people want to go into a deposition and have to be asked, well, is it true?
Yeah, I hear you. Right. So what you're saying is, hey man, as long as it's true and it's provable, you know, if someone can, you know, it's a free country, they can do whatever they want, but it's true and it's provable. What would be the point?
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you know, again, it's my story, and there's a lot of other characters that played a big part in my life, and I write about looking back. This is kind of how it went. I mean, at the end of it, I mean, the Black Crowes, it's a great band, and we had ups and we had downs, and we had all sorts of things in between. And I just thought I was at a place where I could look back and write a book kind of about getting everything you want and not being at all prepared for it.
Yeah. When you first got asked to join the band, mm-hmm. you walked into the bathroom in the bar and you looked in the mirror and you said, just do what your gut tells you. And your gut told you don't join the band. These guys are fucking crazy. Okay. Yeah. So you disregarded your gut check. I was curious how you looked at that later on, not in terms of making a bad decision, because it might've been the best decision you ever made in your life. Nobody knows this or not. But as far as trusting yourself back then and where you are today.
Well, it wasn't a bar. It was a friend's apartment, just as a matter of clarification. And it was just me and Chris. Like Rich wasn't a part of that. And the band that I joined in 1987, which was called Mr. Crow's Garden, it was Chris and Rich and whatever bass player was around at that moment. And their drummer, they had gone through a few drummers, and there was a guy in the band named Jeff Sullivan, and he had just quit because he joined another band called Driving and Crying.
Right.
Who had signed a major label deal, and their drummer was a flake. So they kicked him to the curb and they hired Jeff away from Mr. Crow's Garden. So Chris and I had become very close friends. And, you know, Chris asking me to join Mr. Garden, Mr. Crow's Garden at that point was nothing like what the Black Crowes became. Nothing at all. I'd been playing drums for 3 months with any regularity. You know, it wasn't this was not a guy with a real vision of where the band might go musically looking at me and going, that's the drummer I need. His best friend happened to be a drummer. That's right. Really what it was. And I was already in my own band. I'd moved to Atlanta to start a different band. And so Chris and I were great friends, largely because we weren't in the same band. And I was aware of that fact. I watched how he interacted with other people. And I had even had the thought of, as long as I'm never in a band with that guy, we'll get along great, because it won't matter. So I was already well aware of that scenario, of that situation, or that vibe. So when he had asked me to join for a while, putting him off. And then I was already troubled by some stuff happening within my own band. It wasn't like that was some perfect situation at all. And I did feel, I knew, like, this is a classic case of my brain, my intellectual side knows exactly that I'm walking into a burning house, and there's no reason to do that. The codependent in me, the emotional side, the guy who had already unwittingly become this steadying point for Chris Robbins. Like, as I understood it, I was the guy that showed up and that he just leaned on and needed to get through the day. What I couldn't have understood at the time was I was just the latest guy. You know what I mean? There's always somebody that he's hitching his wagon to and leaning on and bringing things to their life too. I mean, we had a great time together, and I truly enjoyed his company. But a lot of things that I interpreted as us becoming very, very close, I then saw over the years that's just how he was with a lot of people. I didn't know that.
Right.
And I also was aware, like I said, intellectually, I could realize, well, that's not a healthy relationship. I don't want to be someone's caretaker. It's not what I'm here for.
Sure.
And the truth is, if my band, Marry My Hope, it's real simple. The things about Marry My Hope that were freaking me out was two of my band members were just doing tons of drugs. I was just not into drugs on any level at that point. And it just weirded me out. I was like, what are we doing here? Two of the guys in the band are just tripping like every other day. And me and the singer are just kind of flying blind in that world. That was the easiest thing. And they're great guys. I'm still friends with, hell, Sven Pippian was the bass. He ended up in the CROWES forever. Mm. And Clint Steele, the guitar player, he's one of my life. I've known him since, high school. We're still all friends. But being in a band with two guys that were doing drugs at a time when I didn't understand drugs, that's another part of it too. It's not, all of those things sort of led me to thinking, well, I think I probably, and musically, Marry My Hope was really ambitious. They were going for it in a way that I didn't quite feel I was ready to play yet. I did have an insecurity about my playing. I was very confident that what I could do, I was good at, but they were asking me to do things I didn't feel like I was ready for. And I would have never admitted that to another soul in 1987. That's how stunted I was emotionally. So, again, all this mixed bag of things led to me ignoring what my brain knew to be. Like when I said to you, what does your gut say? My gut, or in the book, my gut is these guys are crazy, join their band. It might've been my brain saying that. My gut, my codependent nature was saying, I can help these guys. Chris needs me. Chris needs me. Yeah. And there was also a thing of their songs are really straight. There's not a lot of time signature changes. It's just, I can already play their music. And I'd already done a session with them in the studio. In fact, I knew their music. I knew I could play. I felt full confidence sitting at the drum stool of Mr. Crow's Garden. I had less confidence sitting with Marry My Hope. And so all of that led to me going, okay, screw it. I'm just going to do this.
Right. You've done a lot, clearly, in speaking to you, man. You've done a lot of work as far as like therapy or whatever. You've done work that you process your feelings and thoughts much better today.
Yeah. It would be hard. Trust me. I can't know where I'd be if I was still taking on the world like I did in 1987.
Today, you're more trusting of your gut?
I am entirely trusting of my gut.
Good, man.
Because I don't kid myself anymore. It's like the secret to the biggest thing I learned is it's not about being honest with other people. You have to be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
That then you can be honest with other people. When you're not honest with yourself, you're dishonest across the board.
Yes.
Not by design, but if you're kidding yourself, or if you're lying to yourself about what your real motivations are, what your real feelings are, if you don't even know what your real feelings are, it's almost like you're you're putting extra weight on your back. And so you're going to walk with a little bit of a limp, and everyone else is going to see that little bit of a limp, and it's going to impact everything you do. You know, I mean, there's a million analogies you'd come up with, but I look at it like you're introducing you're putting something into it's like there's an invasive species coming into your central nervous system.
Oh yeah.
It's the lie you told yourself, and it's going to impact the ecosystem of all of your relationships, and you're going to be the last guy to notice it because you're the one kidding yourself.
Yeah.
That took a long time. I mean, and then you can read something that opens your eyes to that, and you can recognize it, but then you have to do the work every single day. You have to manage that, and then only by managing it for time can you hopefully eradicate it. And I don't think you ever fully eradicate codependency. My God, of course not. I still have flare-ups, and I'm just in a bad mood, and it always comes back to, well, wait, what am I why am I letting somebody else dictate my mood? You know, and it's like, oh, because I'm codependent. And you have to back up and stop and go, okay, that's their load to carry. Mine is this. My feeling is this. My thought is this. Hopefully they're able to those things can reconcile. And hopefully my feelings and my thoughts can operate concurrently. You know, they can go together. And when they can't, then I have to figure out which one's more important to me. And I have to accept it and know that I might be making the bad decision, but this is the only way I can go forward without driving myself crazy.
Yeah, but it's so it's funny when I've gone through a lot of different changes in my life as well, not necessarily codependency, but reprogramming. And it's exhausting, man.
Yeah, it is.
It really is. I mean, it's like fucking, because you get caught, because there may be a little thing, and it's not the thing, it's your reaction to it. And you sit there like, why the fuck is this bothering me?
Listen, man, I'm of the mindset that I can handle just about anything. What gets in the way is my reaction to things, is the improper reaction. You know, I had surgery 2 weeks ago. I have a torn bicep tendon. I'm wearing this Terminator.
Look at that, man. You look very powerful, Mr. Gorman.
Yeah, I look like a total badass. And so I know that, you know, it's a torn bicep tendon. Excuse me 1 sec. I'm looking aside. Okay. It's major surgery, but it's routine surgery. If that, you know, I have 10 weeks of rehab ahead of me. I'm not picking up a drumstick for 3 months.
Wow.
That's what if I want to do it right, because I'm not going to rush this. I'm not going to screw around with my right arm.
Yeah.
But you know, just as an example, when you're sitting with a surgeon and he's going over the potential, you know, this should go according to plan. However, there's a nerve that runs down your right arm, and it's going to be bumped, and you may lose the use of some of your fingers. It's a possibility. Shit. Rarely, if ever, happens, but it's always a possibility. Now, in 1996, if a surgeon had told me that, I would have gone home and just prepared for the worst. And what I heard today, or what I said to this guy a month ago, and what I heard yesterday when I got my first cast off was, let's see how your fingers are doing. It's my whole, I don't want to get off track. My point was, okay, cool. Just tell me what's going on. Like, I will handle whatever this means. I don't want to allow myself to run down a bunch of pathways in my mind that I don't, on misinformation or a lack of information. And the point was this, and because I have thought about it, it gave me reason to think, what if I can't play drums again? That's a pretty significant thing. If that were to happen, there's no indication that anything like that's going on, but I did have a little time where I had to think about it. And I thought, well, okay, couldn't have gone better. You know what I mean? It's like, that's going to suck. I'll miss it forever. But there's a lot of other things I would miss more. You know, I have a family. I have future projects that I'm working on. I have things going on. And so I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back. I'm saying that I am glad that I'm at a place where I could process that and think about it and not allow it to drive me crazy and lose sleep.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have been the case 30 years ago. That probably wouldn't have been the case, 20 years ago. So that's the case now. All there is to do is just continue to improve. Right. And like you said, a lot of work, and it's daily. It's daily. It's not a daily grind, but it's a daily effort.
Yeah.
It was a daily grind at first, and now it's just a daily effort.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I still do stupid shit all the time. I mean, that's the thing. It's not like I'm not. I can look back every day and go, why did I say that? Or why did that push me so much? But I'm aware of it.
But at least you can answer that question now.
Of course. Yeah.
You know, and you have and you can even think of it. Wow. Why did it, you know, you could have the wherewithal to say,
well, I'm the youngest of 8 kids, and that's who I am more than anything. I'm number 8 of 8. And so
God bless your parents.
You know, so you have a few things at play when you're the baby. You know, everyone always thinks you're spoiled. Well, I wasn't spoiled materially, trust me. There was not an extra nickel going around my life, but I was carried everywhere. I didn't walk till I was 16 months old because everybody wanted to carry the baby. I mean, you know, think about it, but you know, that's like a funny thing, but that says a lot about how I approached life. Yeah. Like I had 7 people that I could look to if I needed anything, not to even mention my parents. I'm talking about my siblings.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then I did have a really hard ass dad who I would now look back and say is a narcissist based on all that I know about that.
Right.
He did everything the right way until one day he decided not to. And he split when I was 16. He'd been a Marine and he carried that, you know, there's no such thing as an ex-Marine. There's a former Marine, but there ain't no ex-Marine.
Yeah.
So I grew up afraid of my dad. He was a real hard, very much a disciplinarian, and didn't think twice about smacking us around if we screwed up or if he was angry, either one.
Yeah.
It was indiscriminate. So, but I had 5 older brothers who would, in their own ways, the best they could, look out for me. I grew up in, you know, if anybody messed with me outside my house, I had 5 older brothers.
Yeah.
That never happened twice.
Right. I would imagine.
No kid ever fucked with me twice. They got their ass handed to them. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of these things but it really impacts who you are and how you see the world, you know? And so, you know, I had plenty to unpack long before I was in a big hit band that I had not done. You know, that I had not unpacked. And I've had several episodes in my life where, you know, the band became too much for me, and it all came to a head in 1992. I had a real breakdown in Japan where all of my feelings and thoughts about the band, nothing was reconciling. And you know, there's a real arrogance to walking through life going, it's cool, man. I got this. And not showing that you're losing your mind a little bit, not showing that you're upset or that you're hurt. You know, the last thing a guy wants to do is go, God, dude, you're breaking my heart here. That's impossible to say when you're a young man.
Yes.
You know, you think it's weak. And vulnerability is not something I was interested in showing anybody. I was always like, I could handle any situation. You know what I mean? And I was that guy in Mr. Crow's Garden. The shit hits the fan. It's like, Steve, fix it. You know, like, I got this. I didn't have shit. I just knew how to act like I had it. So I had plenty of things to, like I say, unpack and examine and figure out long before we sold 1 million records. Right. I just hadn't done it yet. And so I was well into my 30s. I was 30, just before my 33rd birthday is when all that stuff really came to it. I had a real break in the summer of 1998 where, again, I just sort of shut down, and I just said, that's when that was the one that really changed my life. I looked at my wife and said, I can't do anything anymore. I'm out. My first response was to leave my marriage, to leave the band, to leave. I was like, I'm done. I'm out. I can't do any of this anymore. And that was more that's all the Gorman, that's the Steve Gorman stuff all coming out, and finally having to face, you know, why do I do any of the things I do, much less some of them, you know? There's a lot of, it's hard to look at yourself and go deep into self-examination when you're succeeding beyond your dreams.
Yeah. It's easier to,
if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. It's much easier to do when nothing's working.
Yeah. And it's, you know, I saw the Go-Go's documentary, which is awesome. And Jane Weedland said, I learned nothing from success. Every lesson I learned was from failure. And
I think everybody, failure teaches you a lot, you know, mistakes, failure teaches you. Yeah. Much more.
And so, you know, I don't even know where this started, but,
no, I was just asking, I just had to mention that you could clearly see you've unpacked a lot of this, and, you know, the way you're speaking and about yourself and your situations.
There's tremendous freedom and strength in going, man, what an idiot I am. You know what I mean? It's like,
of course,
and it's incredible how difficult that was for me to say. You know, you construct an idea of yourself. And in my case, it was always really dry, sardonic wit, pretty bright, well-read, whatever I was actually, and whatever I thought that looked like to other people.
Right.
I was also a really good drummer who hadn't drum. I took to drumming very quickly, and I got constant praise for, oh my God, he's only been playing for 3 months. He's only been playing for a year. That guy's only been playing for 3 years. Well, there's a point in time too, where just as a musician, where it's like, so fucking what? Like you're here. And, by the mid 90s, I had that hit me like, well, that excuses my shortcomings initially, but I'm on my 3rd album. Who am I really going to be as a drummer? You know what I mean? Like, I had this for the first time, and I was in, when our second record came out, I was in, Modern Drummer did a big story on me. And I remember total imposter syndrome. I was just thinking like, man, I've had a drum kit for 5 years. I was happy to do it. And I think what I said sense, but I didn't, what I wanted to look at the guy and say is, I don't have any idea what I'm doing, dude.
You
I
felt
taught myself how to
undeserving.
play this instrument, all that stuff.
Yeah. I get
But again, that's on the heels of, I don't know what I'm doing. And I just sold 5 million records. That doesn't sound good coming out of my mouth. And it doesn't sound good at all to someone else's ear.
Yeah. It's not congruent. At a certain point in time, Johnny Colt quits the band, and Pete gives you what to me is incredibly kind and compassionate advice. He says to you, Steve, you're a codependent dealing with addicts. You need to educate yourself and seriously consider changing your approach to handling the band members. Get the book, Codependent No More.
Right.
Few questions on that to the extent you're comfortable answering them. How did you initially feel when Pete told you this? Was it like new information, or like, what the hell are you talking about? Or
yeah, we had spoken and at length for years about addiction, and that was talking about other people.
Sure.
And for the first time, I don't know if it's the first time he mentioned the word codependent. It's the first time I heard him say it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was ready for some clarity. That's all I knew. I need something. And again, I don't care what it is. I can't handle the confusion anymore. I just, my sense of self, my identity was so much a part of the band, but not in a way that I showed publicly, if that makes sense. Like, when I looked at posters of the band, I didn't see myself. I saw, there's the Black Crowes. I didn't, and that's just my job on a certain extent. And I didn't think I have to live up to the guy on that poster. I didn't think that. But I probably should have a little more. I needed some separation. I needed to look at it like, this is my job, as opposed to this is my life. Because when it's your life, other people's problems are your problem too.
Well, other people determine your highs and lows.
Without question. You're only as happy as the saddest guy next to you.
Right.
And in a case like the Black Crowes, that means you're not fucking very happy ever for very long. That's just a reality. There's a lot of miserable shit going around that context in that world. So when I was just happy that, like Pete just was explaining to me what, as he understood it, what codependency was. And he had read this book, and he was looking at himself as well. I mean, this is a guy who started working with Van Halen, managed David Lee Roth, and then managed the Black Crowes. It's like, oh my God.
Baptism by fire.
Yeah. From the frying pan to the frying pan to the frying pan to the fire, and it's like, wow. So, and when we had been discussing addiction, and the band was having conversations regularly about drinking and drugging in the early 90s, and they all start with tremendous concern for Chris, and then it's concern for Ed, and then it's concern for Mark, and I'm saying the rest of us are having these conversations. And anytime we bring it up to the people you're concerned about, we're met with complete go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
So it was just a constant. Addiction is so bewildering and terrifying and awful to fight. You can't fight it. Like, the addict has to surrender, and so do the people in his life. Everyone has to surrender. Addiction is undefeated.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I know
exactly what you mean.
It's a 600-headed fire breathing dragon. And I think it's a plague, you know, and it's the saddest fucking thing in the world. And it is a true disease. I don't have there's no gray area in my mind about that. There certainly was in the 90s about that. And
you tend to think when you're not familiar, you think it's willpower.
Of course you do. Yeah.
Because you don't know.
I mean, I've never had a time when I said, I need to back off the drinking where I couldn't back off the drinking.
Because you're not an
addict. I want to
addict.
back off drinking. I just stopped drinking. It's like, and I know now, of course, but for the grace of God go I. That's just a gift, which I'm very greatly appreciative of. But so back to your question, when I got the book and I read it, I immediately was, you know, I'd never see the things that I thought were strength, loyalty, dedication. Bro, I got your back, dude. I'm not going to let anyone down. I'm not going to let anyone down. I thought those were just strengths. I thought there was no context in which they couldn't be anything but strengths. When I was reading about codependency, and this, again, it wasn't even about the band. It was about my family. It was about my dad. It was about my life view from day one. I started to recognize, I've been doing all the right things, but for a lot of the wrong reasons. Yeah. You know, loyalty's great. Always being there when you're needed is great. But are you doing it because you want to? Are you doing it because you're obligated? Have you even thought about it ever? Do you have any idea why you're doing the stuff you're doing? My father raised his family. My dad had very hard, fast rules. He wasn't so big on explaining why they mattered.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was just, I grew up in a house where I thought you follow his rules or you get your ass kicked. That's why it mattered. I didn't want to get spanked.
Yeah.
I didn't want someone to slap me in the face.
Right.
I could have used a little more information.
I grew up in the same household, so you're preaching to the choir, man. I understand.
And so it's a tough way to, you know, it's funny. Like everybody, I mean, I know that I was always like a good kid. My teachers liked me. I always had a lot of friends. I was an athlete. I didn't have some tragic childhood. I was also in a house where I never questioned if I was loved or not. Right. I mean, I grew up with a tremendous sense of self-worth and security, despite the fact that I was terrified of my father. Right. I had both of those things at the same time. That's
unusual.
It is unusual. Yeah. But then again, when you get yelled at, you get knocked around, and then an older brother says, "Hey, it's not you, it's him." That's a true parachute.
Yeah, it's huge.
Because a 7-year-old kid's going to go internalize that and feel great shame.
Yes.
When your 11-year-old brother goes, "Man, that guy's a dick." It's like, "Oh, he is? Oh, thanks." Whew.
Thanks. Yeah.
It's still, trust me, that stuff still happens. But I looked at my family as constantly taking the lid off the crock pot that my dad was, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I had those issues, but nowhere near to the extent I would if I didn't have a support system around me. My mom was entirely loving, and my siblings always had we fought, brothers fight, but I never questioned that any of those people would take a bullet for me. If that makes, no one was shooting at us, figuratively speaking. I knew they had my back.
Yeah.
And I also knew, like I said, my dad did a lot of things that weren't great. He also, my parents' definition of parenting is incredibly different from mine, but at the root of it, we got 8 kids. And by God, every one of those kids, by the time they turn 18, they're not going to be afraid to leave this house and go make something of themselves. And my parents went 8 for 8. So I'm not knocking on them. You know what I mean? Right. I don't. I mean, their idea, my parents were working class. No one in our family before them had gone to college. I guess my maternal grandmother had, but that was it. Neither one of my parents finished college. They put 8 kids out into the world and into 8 very different fields, 8 very different paths. And all of my siblings, every one of us is a success story. And that's not cool. I'm not waving a Gorman flag blindly. I look at every one of my siblings now as an adult with pure separation. I go, holy shit, that's amazing what you've accomplished and what you've done, and how well you are, how happy you are in your own skin. We're all really good parents. We've got great, they're all these things that came out of a house that was oftentimes on fire.
Right.
And so the lesson learned without knowing I was learning, like that when you grow up in that kind of a household, I say towards the end of the book, it's strengths and weaknesses. I was handcuffed and I was set free by all the things my family. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm the youngest of 8 kids. That's who I am.
Right.
And that has gotten me through everything. And in the Black Crowes, I was the only member of the band with other siblings.
Oh,
Johnny was an only child. Jeff had a younger sister. That's not true. He had a younger sister. But Chris and Rich just have each other. I have 7 older siblings. It was a totally different. I'm coming from an entirely different place than anybody else. Chris is the oldest. He's only got one brother. Rich is Chris's brother. Johnny's an only child. Jeff has a younger sister. That's it. Yeah. I have, when our first record came out, I was 5. I had a brother who was 39 years old. And I had a sister who was 37. I had a brother who was 35. I had a brother who was 33. I mean, I had 7 people there was another person every 2 years that was older than me, that was already off doing their entirely other thing. They were all thrilled for my success, but they were only going to be happy if I was happy. They weren't like, oh my God, dude, you're opening for Aerosmith. It was, how is that? Is that good? And if I said yes, they were happy for me.
That's really cool.
They were just adults already. They had their own lives. Nobody was looking at me like looking up to me. They were looking down at me the way older siblings do. And that was an incredibly grounding. I mean, when I think about the impact that's had on me, I look at myself still to this day. I can see myself as I'm just an amalgamation of those 7 older siblings. Like I have pieces of me that are all of them. And it's just that's a total gift. That's, the things that enabled me to work through a lot of my really dark times when I didn't have the language or understanding of things. It just came from a place of, I never felt, as much as I loved the band and much as I threw my entire self into it, I always knew, well, I'm still I'm still from this family. I'm still from this place of great security and of great support. And so when I was confused and when I was allowing things to really get the best of me, the final step, the thing that always was going to save me, was the family I was from.
Man, you're lucky to have that. Good for you, man.
Oh, very much
good that it pulled you out. What was the trigger for you to say, I've got to start making some changes. I've got to address this codependency?
Well, because there was a lot of things, but I mean, it just came to a head. As you said, Johnny quit the band. We fired Mark. We fired Mark because he was too wasted. Well, Chris is wasted every day. Ed's wasted every day. Johnny quit the band because he got sober. He couldn't stay around it because he was completely sober. Yeah. I'm somewhere in the middle of those 2 worlds. Rich is over in his own corner of the room. We left Atlanta in 1990 like the 5 Musketeers. Right. And in 1997 or 1991, one of the Musketeers left. We replaced him. We got better. We added another Musketeer. Then it was 6 of us. And that band was, to my mind, the best rock and roll band in the world for a few years. We were certainly at that level where you couldn't say somebody was better than us. It's a matter of taste at that point. We're as good as any in the world. Mm-hmm. And if you did what we did, we're the best band. And watched that, to me, very obviously crumble and start to fall apart. And I saw other people not care or refuse to acknowledge it. I wasn't mourning the dysfunction and when I was watching the bands crumble. I don't mean our commercial viability. Now that was crumbling too. What was crumbling was our internal working together. What was dying very plainly by 1996 was the idea that we were all on the same page, or that we all even wanted to be on the same page. That was gone. It was agenda A, agenda B, and Chris is here, Rich is there, everyone else is stuck in the middle, and I'm sitting there going, I think you're both wrong. I'm not choosing a side. You're both completely wrong on what's wrong with us. It's not him and it's not you. It's all of us to a certain extent. And the problems with the band, when we weren't succeeding and we were all together, everybody was fine. when we were succeeding wildly and at each other's throats, everybody was miserable. It's real simple to me.
Yeah.
I heard something, of all the people to have said this. I remember reading, I think it was Margaret Thatcher, who I would hardly say I'm a card-carrying fan of. But there was a quote that it was attributed to her. It was probably been said for millennia. And it was, you have to learn from other people's mistakes. You don't have time to make them all yourself.
Good quote, man.
And so it's great. And so as early as like our second record, I'm looking at the guys in my band going, we're going down all these cliched, terrible roads that bands go down before they explode. Like, do you think this is different? You think we're the first people to be here? My God, this is like and I used to say, we're just living a bad, stupid rock band book. Like, people have already made all these mistakes. Do you not see where this is going? And I'm coming from a place, again, like in my family, it was go team. You know, I'm the 8th kid. I never got anything without waiting in line for it, ever.
Right.
Right?
Sure.
My mom, I got a jacket in 4th grade. I still remember it. You know why? Because it's the first new piece of clothing I ever remember getting that wasn't a hand-me-down.
With 8 kids, sure, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and so I thought, we're all together. The Black Crowes, we put ourselves in a place where we really didn't need the outside world. We didn't need the music industry. We had a huge fan base. We didn't need radio and MTV. We like those things, and they're certainly helpful, but we could survive without anything else if we chose to go. My point is, we could go anywhere, and as long as we're together, we're going to make it. We have this man. Look at Pete Angelis. We've got this guy.
Yeah.
So we couldn't even agree on what the band should sound like by the time the 3rd album came around. We're not even agreeing on what we want the band to be. And so I used to say this in band meetings. I'd say, guys, I don't care where we go as long as we go together. I don't give a fuck. Because I didn't get into a band to sell 5 million records. That was the farthest thing from my mind. The truth is, I dropped out of college, bought a drum kit, started a band with some buddies of mine because I wanted to play clubs. It was the dream. I just wanted to do it. I wanted to see how far we could push it. My goal, my mindset was always REM. That's the perfect career. You are in clubs for a while, then you get a couple theaters, and then, you know, when I quit in 1987, that's when REM got their first like top 10 single, The One I Love. And it was weird. I remember like, oh my God, like I'm going to lose my favorite band because they were at the Fox Theater in Atlanta. And I was like, shit, they'll be at the Omni in 2 years. And so I wasn't saying I want to go be where U2 is. I was saying I want to be where REM is. I want to be a club band. I want every record to sell a little more than the one before it for as long as we can go. And I got the exact opposite. You know, like REM was like you know, they went out like this, and we went down like that. You know, Shake Your sold more than Southern Harmony, which sold more than Amorica, which sold more than Three Snakes. And again, it's because the band, myself and the band, we wouldn't acknowledge how much that concerned us. So it's another one of those things where when you don't admit that you wish you were doing better, that festers and it influences decisions you're making. Whereas if we had just simply said, and there's not a single member of the Black Crowes that wouldn't have, if they had been honest in 1996, wouldn't have said, I'm very worried that we're not selling records. I'm very worried that our ticket sales are down. I don't want this to fail. I want to be successful again. Everyone felt that. Nobody would say it in those basic terms. Or, well, that's not true. Rich would say that. Rich would say, I want to sell 1 million records again, guys. Fuck this shit. I want to sell. He's the only one that would say it out loud. Now, he was not somebody that anybody else was ever going to feel like, let's get behind Rich. He's not a leader. Right. That anybody else would have responded to for, you know, his fault or ours or neither or both, whatever. It's just what it is. But Chris wasn't going to admit that. I wasn't willing to say it plainly and stand by it. And so when you have unstated frustrations and unstated, you know, situations, you know, like, again, it's that thing. It's like you're introducing an invasive species into the conversation and you're not even aware of it. And so you're going to make decisions where you're going to double down on bad decisions because you don't want to admit you made a mistake.
That's some very,
we did that for years.
It was like the elephant in the room that nobody wanted to talk about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, Pete wanted to talk about it all the time. But I'm not suggesting he wasn't talking about it, but we weren't listening.
Band members. The thing I was so impressed with your story is that at some point you were able to give yourself a pat on the back for recognizing some of these things and like self-care, start doing a little more self-care. And it was just a very impressive sort of, very impressive that you did that. Cause as you know, it's a hard, we talked about, it's a hard thing to do and not a lot of people turn it around. Any advice because I get this all the time. People talk about, codependency, as you know, is not an isolated thing. It's probably, especially for musicians, it's probably one of the more common issues and challenges people have that they talk about here on the show. I think it's huge for musicians. I think there's, everywhere there's an addict, you're going to find a codependent. You know what I mean? Dude, that's the best quote. You had a bunch of good quotes. That might be the best.
Well, if you see a cardinal, there's always, isn't it like anywhere you see a cardinal, there's a tufted titmouse 10 feet away or something. There's some bird that always follows the cardinal.
Everywhere there's an addict, there's a codependent.
So if you you find a functioning addict, I'll show you a codependent. And
somewhere near.
And the problem with both is that neither usually knows that's what they are. And again, I look at codependency like I look at addiction. It's not a moral failing. It's not a question of spine.
No,
it's a question of, I know exactly why. I think I know exactly why I'm a codependent. I grew up in a house where there's a rampaging narcissist running around, and I was terrified of him. You know what I mean? I was shaping my life experience to avoid interacting with my dad my whole life.
Yeah.
I'm not throwing dirt on the guy. My older brothers grew up with a very different father. I mean, he changed as he grew up, just as, the dad I came of age with a dad that it was all starting to unravel. Like his trajectory wasn't working anymore. His jobs weren't what he thought they would be. His career wasn't where he thought it should be. The younger version of my dad was on paper a much more effective dad and a much more involved father. I got the short end of the stick in a lot of those ways. It's like my oldest brother, Bob, is 14 years older than me. And if he's telling a story about him at 12 and I tell a story about me at 12, it sounds like it's different planets.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
And so, and it's, I've lost the train of thought. I'm sorry. My cat just jumped off the chair. I thought she was jumping at me.
Talking about advice for others that are struggling with codependency.
The codependent thing. There's a thing about addiction, which is if somebody faces themselves, you're managing your whole life, but there is a thing of, I'm not going to drink. Let's say it's alcohol. I'm not going to drink today. And every day you don't drink is a success. Sure. You don't get something in codependency that's that clear. You know what I mean? Like, there's not a thing where you wake up every day and it's an actual act of, I'm not drinking today. And when I lay down tonight, it's like, it's another day. It's another number. It's a win. Codependency is like, it's not quite as overt as that. There's not a thing like that you can just look to and say, hey, I'm dealing with this. But that said, it also takes on a lot of different sort of forms and shapes. Mine is specifically walking into a situation and immediately, instead of immediately figuring out, how do I read this? How do I feel? What do I think? It's, how do I survive? How do I maneuver? Yeah. How do I get this thing back on the track? Not how do I get myself back on track? How do I save this? How do I fix or save this situation or this group of people? And so I grew up doing that my whole life as a kid. I mean, I'm spinning every which way just to make sure I'm not going to be, getting it from the top. I had a few years where I didn't have any of that in my life. And then I moved to Atlanta. And it's funny. There are things about Chris that I was immediately that were very familiar to me. I mean, someone that's, and I don't say this as an insult, but a narcissist, they're all the same.
Yes.
I recognized so much in him and it was so familiar. And at that age, it was very easy to confuse familiarity with comfort.
With comfort. Yeah, man. I totally understand that. That's your,
you know what I mean? And
yeah.
I think that when people are, when someone's going through a lot of anxiety or panic and they say, I can't stop thinking about these bad things. Finding familiar is easier than finding unfamiliar, even if the familiar is a grease fire.
Yes.
You always want to go back to something you at least have been there before. And so a lot of people, there's a lot of times in life when you're choosing a darker road because at least you know that road.
Yeah, man.
Security and experience, security and just recognition those are good things to know. But like I said, it's real easy to confuse those things with comfortable, or you are only comfortable when you're uncomfortable, if that makes sense. Your comfort zone is to be off kilter. And we all know people like this, when everything they work their ass off, they put a million things out into the universe and they get a few back and suddenly it all takes shape. And the first thing they do is drive it right into the ditch.
Yeah.
And that's the story of the Black Crowes. I mean, repeatedly, there are people that, the extent to which I was willing to live a life without clarity was just not nearly as deep as the extent of my bandmates. You know what I mean? There was a time when I was like, I have had enough. I can't do this anymore. And I'm just thankful for that. But the second act of the Black Crowes from 2005 to 13 was much easier for me, while at times being so much darker and so much more, so much heavier and so much more dysfunctional than it had been in the 90s. And I think a part of that is, when you're in your late 20s, things carry a certain weight. When you're in your late 30s and early 40s, they carry it's heavier.
Yeah.
To continue to see that stuff around you. The difference was I was able to manage myself in it. And I realized, I can't, I'm not here to put out fires, man. I'm here to jump out of the fire.
Well, at that point in your life, you weren't looking to fix anymore. You were looking to fix things that I could fix not within the band's dynamic, but I was, I'm more than happy to go out and do the work, do the promotion, do 15 interviews a day, do whatever I can. Right.
That makes sense to keep things moving forward and to try to help the band in those ways. If somebody wants to talk to me, I'll talk to them all day long. I'll give you my opinions, but I'm not concerned with whether you embrace my ideology. Right. I'm not concerned if you you think I'm making sense or not, isn't my concern, but I'm not going to not tell you what I think.
Yeah.
Pete gave me that book, Codependent No More. Pete also in the 2000s, in 2008, we were on the phone and I was at a hotel in Florida and we had a day off and I had a view of the ocean and I've just got my door open and I'm just listening to the waves. It's very nice. And in the room next to me was another member of the band and he and his wife were having an argument and it was awful. I couldn't understand the words. I could hear it, but I couldn't understand it. But it was just so painful. That's all I felt was that's not a run-of-the-mill argument. And it's just so, it really hit me hard, unsurprisingly. And it wasn't about, like I said, I couldn't understand a single word. I didn't know who was right or wrong. It's not that. It wasn't a question where I was thinking, I wonder if I can go make this better by any stretch. It was just simply, it was just sadness is all I heard and felt. Waves of it just, and it very surprising to me at the time. It hit me. And at that moment, Pete called and was like, "What's up?" He was checking in on something. And he was like, "Man, you don't sound good." And I said, "No, I'm really upset." And I told him what I'd just heard for a few minutes. And he said, "Hey man, you know something?" He said, "You should go to an Al-Anon meeting." And I said, "Yeah, I've heard of that." And I knew what it was, like as in, if you read a few paragraphs about it. And he shared with me that does that a lot. And he gave me his whole story, which is not mine to tell, about Al-Anon. And he said, "Listen, man, there's one around you tonight. You can find one. I guarantee it. It's this this secret society. They're everywhere." And we were in Palm Beach, Florida. And I went down to the front desk And I said, can I get a rental car to the hotel like within a couple hours? And he said, yeah, they had a service. A guy brought the car over, and I drove that night into town and went to an Al-Anon meeting. And the first one I went to, I just sat there like, oh, thank God, you know?
Yeah.
And I started going for years. And
good for you, man.
I haven't been now for several years, but and again, it was just a thing of, I would have gone into a meeting like that in the 90s and been looking for the quick fix, or thinking I would have been looking for justification for myself.
Right.
As opposed to just accepting, again, like I'm a mess because I'm around people who are a mess and I don't know what to do about it. And then, the realization is, oh, well, just take care of yourself. That's all you can do about it. And be honest with yourself and be accountable to yourself first.
Yeah.
And then see what happens. And it was huge for me.
Yeah, those meetings
because there, like I said, there were things that happened in 2008, 2009, 2010. They were terrible, awful, terrible things between the brothers primarily. That in the 90s, they didn't impact me anywhere near the way they would have in the 90s, but they were much worse than anything in the 90s. But that's all because of me and who I was at that age. And again, like I say, things you do in your 20s. I always had this expectation. This is on me again. I just assumed everybody was going to wake up one day and stop treating each other terribly. I just thought that I'm the idiot who thought if we go out and sell a bunch of records, millions of records, we'll all be in better moods. We'll all be happy. We'll all recognize that this is a rare thing and we got to protect it and preserve it. And we've got to take care of this. And we have to move together as a team. I really thought that's what everybody's reaction would be, and that's not the case at all. Yeah. So again, I've always said everybody has expectations about every situation in their life. The difference is some people acknowledge them and some don't. But man, those subconscious expectations are huge. I think about those a lot of times. I think when I go into a situation now, in any situation, especially anything creative, I really try to ask myself, what is your subconscious anticipating that you haven't even acknowledged yet?
Yeah.
And you better if you figure those out ahead of time, you're going to have a much better time of it, because whatever happens, you won't be disappointed.
A lot of wisdom in those meetings that they should be probably teaching in school, like coping skills that.
Well, that's what I took from it. It's I don't even really remember what I thought I was going to get, but I know that when I came out of that very first one, I just knew this, I felt better.
Yeah.
That's what I knew. That's really the first meeting. All I knew is I felt much better. And so I continued to one. And I mean, there was another one I went to in Minneapolis in probably 2010 that for reasons that don't really matter for this conversation, that was the most significant one I ever had. I really had one of those transformational conversations where it was a bunch of pieces I had put out there. They finally, all the dots lined up and a bunch of shit landed. And it was like exhilarating. Like I walked home it was snowing. It's Minneapolis in end of the year. And I walked back to the hotel and I just felt like I was on fire because I felt so good. I just felt so relieved and good and clear. And, those things were really, really instructive for me.
Yeah. Well, when you grow up and you have to have certain survival skills as you did, the problem is nobody comes to you at a certain point in time and says, hey, you know what? You could let those go now.
Oh God, no, that's exactly right.
You could relax and you can have fun, and that doesn't happen, and that fucks you up for a long time.
Oh, for sure. It's like I used to say those same things about what I was saying. Being the young, angry band that wants to kick down all the doors. Well, but then we kicked them all down. Like, right. Why are we still? I used to say to Chris, I was like, you're just always looking for a fight. Like, I'm driving down the PCH. I'm looking at the ocean. You're focusing on the potholes. Like, what's happening?
Yeah.
Why is that your view? When we walk on stage, there's 3,000 people that are really happy. There's one guy in the front row sitting down. Why are you yelling at him to stand up? Why don't you address the 2,999 people that are thrilled that we're on stage? You make choices every day on which energy you're going to be fueled by. Oh,
totally.
We all do. And at some point I did start to actively think about those things and try to change. It like what you said. Yeah. You grow up with a bunch of weapons, and then it's really instructive for someone to go, dude, the war's over.
Right. And it's,
but it's hard for a lot of people when you take away the wall, they don't know what to push.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
Totally. I want to talk just, since this is a music show, we'll talk about music for a few minutes.
I like music. Big fan.
Me too. This is almost an unfair question. Favorite musicians you've enjoyed playing with?
My favorite musician that I've ever played with is Tom Bukovac.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
He is a guitarist in Nashville. For the people that don't know him, he's a session guitarist of incredible repute. It's not a hyperbole to say he's 2 decades in as the number one session guitarist in Nashville, Tennessee. He's younger than me. I heard about Tom Bukovac for years. I just heard people say, oh, this guy Bukovac. So I assumed he was an old timer from the 70s. Like he was playing with must have been on those Christopherson and Willie Nelson records, and he's still kicking. I met him in 2012 on an album that was recorded in his house. I got a call from a producer saying, hey, a writer in town's doing his first album. He's a big Black Crowes fan, asked me to get in touch. Is there any way you'd play drums on it? And I said, well, yeah, what is it? I'm just sitting at home one day and get a call. Sure. And he said, well, Tom Bukovac's is playing guitar, and we're going to do it at his home studio. And just because I had heard I said, oh man, I'm finally going to meet this guy, Tom Bukovac. I drive to this house, and I'm literally expecting at that time a 67-year-old dude in overalls with a Telecaster. I just didn't know what to expect. And I walk in, and here's this rock guy from Cleveland, right, who's at the time I'm in my late 40s, he's in his early 40s, and it's one of these albums in Nashville. I think we did the whole thing in 2 days of tracking, maybe 3 tops. But Bukovac, what I first noticed about him was he's hilariously funny, super gregarious, outgoing. He's just an amazing hang. And then when we played, I was thrown by the fact that every take he was playing like it was his last day on earth. I mean, he was into it in a level that I just was thrown by at first.
Right.
And some of these songs are 1-4, 1-4, 1-4 bridge, 5-1, 1-4 chorus, 5-1, 5-1. We're talking about Nashville number chart, 5 chords total.
Right.
Back and forth songs. And his enthusiasm, but his desperation at just getting everything out. And it wasn't a session guy's mind. It was heart and soul in every note he played, every chord. And after about the 3rd song, I finally went, oh, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Right.
And I'd heard people talk about him for years, and I'd heard other guitarists go, well, he's kind of a genius. And so when people say that, whatever my expectation was, I was totally disarmed by him, because he's just a dude. But he happens to know more about guitar than anybody I've ever known in my life. Like, as a player, it's so hard to say, because it's just a matter. Obviously, I've played with Jimmy Page. I was in a band with Rich Robinson for 27 years. But I say Book's my favorite because, I just love him with all my heart. He's the best guy in the world. But he can play any style of guitar, but in a way where you would swear it's the only thing he knows how to play. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
He's the only person I've ever heard play a Black Crowes song where it sounded like Rich was playing. He's the only guy that I've ever heard do that. He plays in Joe Walsh's band. He plays in people that hire him to go out on tour are only great. You got to be somebody to get his ass on a bus. I can tell you that. But he's just, it's for my personal taste. Like, if you factor in everything I love about a musician, he has every one of those. He checks every single box and then some. So that's why I say he's my favorite guy to play with. It's just he's a border collie in a world of dogs to me.
That's funny. Good, good analogy, man.
Yeah. He's really, really, really like unlike anybody else I've ever met, and unlike any other musician I've ever played with. And again, I've played with.
That's a big endorsement.
I've been so fortunate to the number of musicians I've played with who are just all mind-boggling.
Top 3 gigs or top 3 musical experiences for you?
The first gig I ever played in a club with Marry My Hope was opening for Mr. Crow's Garden in May of 1987. I mean, I could never have another gig feel that way. I would never want to have another gig feel that way, but it's, as far as the dent on my psyche and like I felt like I took a moonwalk.
Yeah.
And I came back with, there was moon dust in my lungs that would never leave after that very first show. That was epic for me. It would sound like I was making it up if I tried to explain what that show did to me. But having spent a few years going to see bands in clubs like Jason and the Scorchers again, seeing them in a dive bar in 1983 and just going, I have to do that. Seeing like the Violent Femmes at Cantrell's or whoever it was, seeing REM in very small rooms and then seeing them get into bigger rooms, and all of which was in Nashville. In the 80s, I was going to Nashville to see concerts. So living in Kentucky, but to then be in a club in front of hundreds of people playing in my own band, my songs on my drum kit, and recognizing that none of these people know that I was an RA in a dorm 6 months ago. All they think is
that
I'm
you've been playing really for 3
cool
months.
Band. Like it's cool. This is a guy that this is a band. I am in a band, and that's all that. That was just incalculably impactful to me. And there's a ton of them to that same sort of mindset. The first show the Black Crowes ever played in London was at the Marquee Club, and it was sold out. And we walked on stage, and everybody was singing all the words to all the songs. That had never happened anywhere.
Oh, really?
And for it to happen at the Marquee Club in London, of all places, was. I remember walking into the dressing room after that and not even being able to process it. Like, what in the absolute hell just happened? Like, looking at Pete and probably thinking he hired all these people. It just didn't seem real.
Yeah.
It just didn't seem possible.
That's cool.
Those are the two. And again, I'm sure, like, I don't want to listen to the tapes. Trust me. It ain't about the music on those nights.
Right.
But then there was a lot of nights in the Black Crowes in 95, a few in 93, but in 1994 and 95, there were a lot of nights where I just felt as difficult as it was to be in the band at times, and as much as troubling as the day may have been, there were nights when we walked off stage and I just felt like this is all worth it. It doesn't matter. I mean, that band what we just did is, I will light my feet on fire if I have to, whatever, and that's exactly why I was still there. It's like those things kept me there, and I can look back and separate the day from the night now easier and just go, man, it was an honor to be able to reach those places musically. It's a truly, I look at musicians. I remember the first time I saw Luther Dickinson play guitar, and I said, that boy's just touched. Mm-hmm. Like, that's it. The first time I saw Derek Trucks play guitar, I said, that boy is touched. There's just a thing. And I've never said that about myself. I've never said that about the rest of the Black Crowes, but I have said that about the Black Crowes as a unit. 1995, 94, 95, we were touched.
Yeah. Yeah. Top 3 Desert Island discs.
Yeah. My first thought is I'm gonna pick some long ones.
Box sets, man.
Yeah. Physical Graffiti, the White Album, and Exile on Main Street. Just give me some longevity.
Very cool. Hey, how did you? You did a really good job of really being in the limelight, but like not believing your own hype. Like you seem like all throughout. I never got the sense of like ego.
I didn't have it. I wasn't in the limelight. I mean, the band was, I've said for years, I was famous within a 2-block radius of a venue the Crowes were playing.
Right.
That was it.
Right. I get you.
I mean, I've at a time when we were playing theaters, 92, 93, 94, 95, even some arenas, countless times I would walk out into the house to watch the opening band and nobody would know who I was.
Oh, really?
Now, I did have short hair. And I was wearing a lot of pinstripe suits, but if I walked out in jeans and a sweatshirt and went to the soundboard, I just lived my life,
Wait a minute, you had short hair and you were wearing pinstripe suits.
Yeah.
Really? That was the
album. I wore all suits, and I was just, like the second and third album, I was wearing suits every night on stage all the time. I mean, any photo of the band from that era, that's what you see. And for the second album, my hair was shorter than it is right now. Like this is, I cut this really short. Now it's grown back, but I'll probably knock it down again. But it was, it was a totally different look. So I didn't do that for this reason, but it didn't take long to realize, I can do whatever. I can walk out and buy a t-shirt at my own concert and no one's going to know who I am.
Right.
So I didn't have things in my face on any level. I mean, Chris had to deal with all that from a very early in our albums. In the first, I mean, by the summer of '90, Shake Your Money Maker came out in February, and by the summer he was famous. In 6 months, his anonymity was gone for the most part, and no one else in the band had to deal with that. Anybody else could, if they to anywhere they want. You're when you're feeling it that first time, you like dressing cool, you like the look, and you want to walk into a bar and like, what's up, and you hope someone says, aren't you in the Black Crowes? But Chris was the only one who didn't have an option to go incognito anywhere. And I moved to New York. My wife and I moved to New York in 2000, and in the first 3 months I lived in the city, I got recognized more than I had in the 10 years prior.
And everybody in the city's pretty cool. No one's going to hassle you.
No, but it was like, hey, Steve, it's just that. Like, I lived in Atlanta all of the 90s. We were from Atlanta.
Right.
And I guess it was probably, maybe it was just people weren't saying anything because they didn't, but I used to joke that, I'm so famous, people love me so much they ignore me in public to show respect.
Show respect.
It's like, that's how beloved I am. So it was just not really an issue with me. Like I said, if people do know who I am, they're either a Black Crowes fan or they're a drummer, and not much else.
Right. Tell me, what do you like most about yourself today?
I just like that that's probably a long story, I guess. Because I have to think about it. I like that I'm busy. I like that I've been able to continually create new creative outlets and opportunities, and I have a lot of things going on. My family's healthy and happy, and I guess what I like most about me is that the most important thing to me is, well, like I said before, I see myself as this eighth kid. But I also, obviously, I'm a father and I'm a husband and I'm the youngest of 8. And that's who I am wherever I go. You know what I mean? Like, if you see me as a drummer, that's great. And if you see me as a radio host, that's great. But I'm two people's father I'd say that's primarily the single most important thing. That's the first thing I think about. Like, in anything that comes up, my first thought is, how does this impact my family?
Sure.
And, the 2013 tour, the Black Crowes toured a lot through 2010. We took 11 and 12 off and then went out for all of 13. So my kids grew up with me coming and going. They grew up traveling a great deal. But then when my son was 10 and my daughter was 8, for 2 straight years, I was home every day.
Right.
And then when it was time for me to leave again, they were turning 13 and 11. That was a long tour that whole year. And when I came back, it was a different, I mean, they came out to a lot of shows. I was home for breaks and all that, but it was a very different flow in the house when I would show up. It was the first time I ever realized, though, this is going on without me in a way that, like, everyone just has to get on with it. And the kids are starting to have their own lives now. And I'm kind of in the way at times. Like, I'm coming in and I'm not recognizing that they're not waiting on me anymore.
They don't want to cuddle.
And just the idea of, and my son was at an age where you start to rebel a little bit, but in early 2014, he's 13 years old, and he said a few things in anger, like a kid does, but he'd say, you haven't even been here. What do you care? You're not even here.
Yeah.
And that carried more weight than anything anybody in the Black Crowes ever said to me. I was just like, okay, hold on. Everything has to be addressed and adjusted and figured out, because that's no way for a 13-year-old kid to think. And he doesn't even remember saying that, of course. And he was a 13-year-old kid having a tantrum or whatever, didn't want to do his homework. But at the same time, it was supremely impactful to me to go, don't take your eye off the ball here, dude.
Yeah.
There's 2 people and this is not to take away at anything from my wife of now 26 years and what that relationship means, but
congrats,
but she's not watching me every day trying to figure out who she is. That's what my kids are doing,
right?
Of course. And that's something that's very that's everything pales in comparison to what's happening in this house, to the people that I built this family, with a woman who's been there from day one for all the Black Crowes insanity. And now I have a 20 and an 18-year-old, and we're going through all of these things together. The band, my perspective was totally screwed up in the 90s, but that's okay. We didn't have kids yet,
Right.
And my wife knew what she was signing up for. We got married in 94. And the Black Crowes were our entire world. I mean, hers too. This was just what ran our universe. And by the time when I went back to the band in 2005, that was never the case again. It was family, friends. There was all these various things. And the Black Crowes were a part of my life, but they weren't my life.
Right. You did a really nice job painting you painted a really flattering and respectful picture of your wife in the book. I thought it was really cool.
Oh, listen, man, it's the kind of thing where anybody that knows me personally, anybody that knows my wife personally, anyone that knows us as a couple understands her impact, the significance of that relationship in my life. And it's something that, for years I never spoke about. I've done all I can to not speak about it publicly, because it's the one thing that is untouched. It's sacred to me, and it's my security blanket, and it's the wind in my wings, if you will. It's all of these things. It's the things that kept me sane during the darkest times of my life. My phone bills in the 90s, I wouldn't wish those upon anybody. But the number of calls that my wife was on the receiving end of, where she just had to listen and say, "It's okay, it's all right, it's okay." I mean, I'm not saying anyone should feel sorry for what she endured. I'm not trying to dramatize it, but it's not an easy ride.
Yeah.
To be with somebody that's in that environment with what I brought to that. I'm a good guy with a lot of kinks, or whatever you want to describe me as, but it's not easy to be the one person that guy's constantly leaning on.
Yeah.
And so, and she would say, "Oh, Steve's helped me through everything." We're a team. It's what you do, You support each other, and you try to bring out the best in each other, and you encourage each other and all those things. But it's the one part of my life I've always been the least interested in talking about, because anything you say can either sound too I could never get my arms around it and express exactly the entirety of what it means, the significance of it, and I don't want to trivialize it in any way either. You know what I mean? It's just, those things are better left unsaid. I only recently ever started talking about my kids. I can tell you that, I didn't struggle with being super famous, but the band was, and there were people that knew who I was. There were enough instances in the 90s where I recognized it's really good to keep personal shit personal.
Yeah.
I had several honest to God stalkers, for instance.
Did you really?
90s. Yeah. And that's weird.
Kind of scary.
Thankfully they were, I mean, women can hurt you just as much as a man, but it's not like a woman who has a dude after her. It's a little different. I'm a guy in a band. I'm 6'3", and these are fans initially who take things to a really bizarre level. But, in the 90s, when somebody's turning up at your house, or when you're getting letters and packages delivered to your home address, that person did a lot of work to figure that out.
Yeah, that's creepy, man.
You know what I mean?
Oh.
And I had a few things happen like that, where nothing bad happened, but it was really uncomfortable. And a couple of them went on for a couple of years, 2 different times. And so I can still remember when my son was born in 2000, my daughter was born in 2002, and the band went back out in 2005. And I was just walking out to the bus one night, and some fan said, "Steve, how?" And they asked how my kids were, and they knew their names. And it just stopped me in my tracks. And now granted, 99% of the time, they just ran into somebody who my kid goes to preschool with, and who knows, it's totally innocent. They happen to know my kids' names. And the fan is thinking, oh, that's nice to not to say good show, but how are your kids? They're probably thinking that, but I don't know that. And it really freaked me out. I was like, again, Chris was a very famous person. People he's the singer. I enjoyed this best of both worlds life where I didn't have to, people weren't chasing me down, but a few people were actually. And all this to say, I just have always kept those lines pretty clear. I remember the first time I ever put a picture of either of my kids on Instagram, I went back and forth for hours. It just freaked me out to even do that. But I was like, well, hang on, it's a different kind of a vibe. It was a funny post, and I would never tag them by name or all that shit. Again, learn from other people's mistakes. I've seen enough things happen with fans and people's families and weirdness that I just always steered away from all those things as much as I could.
Yeah, that's scary. And someone comes over to you and said, how's your
like it's a 5 and a 3-year-old and their name. So that's not cool.
Well, that starts the wheels spinning and like you get,
And at the same time, I can tell you, we were playing in Ottawa in 2008 at a festival, and my wife and kids were flying up to meet me. And so I had a day off, and I rented a car, went out to the airport to pick them up. And as I'm waiting for the international arrivals, as the people start coming through, they've just cleared customs. I'm just standing there in line. I mean, with a few other people on a line. The doors open and someone comes out and you hold up a sign if you do, whatever, people are doing that. And the first guy to come through, he looked at me and kind of did a double take and then looked away. And then the second person looked at me, same thing, double take. And I'm watching all these people off a plane, and every one of them sees me and kind of does a double take. And at first I thought, well, we're playing this huge festival tomorrow, and maybe they're coming in for the show, and maybe they recognize I'm the guy of the Black Crowes. And the story, of course, then Rosemary and the kids come through, and she's got this look on her face already. And I'm like, what is going on? And my son, who is 8, had just decided to announce to the plane that his dad's in the Black Crowes and we're going to Canada to see him play a show. And so everybody heard it. And it was all fun. It was funny. He just had this moment where he just thought that would be cool to blurt out. And my wife's like, whoa, like easy.
That's funny.
And of course, everybody was totally cool with it. But so they weren't looking at me more to like, that's the guy in the Black Crowes. They were laughing that this dad's kid had just outed him. It was fine.
Yeah.
But, there's plenty of things like that too that are just along the way that are really funny. Like anytime a Crow song comes on in a car, if we're flipping channels on Sirius or something, I turn it up really loud because my kids just die. They're like, stop it, when they were little. And I'd be like, don't you get it? Don't you see how cool I am? I mean, you gotta have fun with it along the way. But for the most part, I keep that very much to myself, generally speaking.
Very cool. Hey, 2 more questions, man. I just want to say thank you very much for all your time and for being so cool. And I really enjoyed this, man. And thank you for sharing everything. Biggest change in your personality over the last 10 years, and how much of that change has been intentional and how much is just a natural part of aging? Biggest change. I think if you saw me 10 years ago and now, they would be pretty easy to discern. It's just that 10 years of that management every day. I'm just checking in with myself more often. I did a few years of therapy along the way too, which, there's the self-therapy, reading books and trying to get in touch, and then getting into therapy and addressing a bunch of stuff that there were no surprises in what was bugging me, but I just hadn't processed it in a way that you can with therapy. I think I roll with the punches as well as anybody you're going to find, and there's been plenty of punches. They come all the time. Like this, that's a bit of a punch right there. It's just like, oh, okay. How did that if you're comfortable, how did that happen?
It was I would love to say it was some heroic effort where
like
I was
in the gym or something?
I was lifting a car to save a child that had fallen under it. No, I was moving a mattress. My wife and I, actually, that's not even true. We moved a mattress, and then I went to grab the box spring, which weighs 7 pounds.
Yeah.
And just the way my arm was, I reached underneath it just to flip it up. And it was just the angle of my arm or the way my hand was positioned just out of the blue. My elbow just popped. I mean, just like, the pain was like, God, what in the hell? And it was like midnight, you know what I mean? So it's like,
oh shit. So you had to deal with that all night.
So I just iced it and took Advil and thought, okay, it's just a weird thing. And morning it was still hurting. And I know just enough to be stupid about my body, you know? So I was like, I think it's just going to be a ligament or something. And long story short, you know, I ended up having to get an MRI, and I tore my bicep tendon. So it wasn't a full tear.
That's
if it's
painful.
a full tear, your bicep like rolls up to your shoulder. It's just like an Achilles, you know, it snaps, rolls up. So that it wasn't that, but it was like an 80% tear. So it's like you're having surgery. That's it. So, and you know, like I said, I would love for it to be a better story, but that's it. But you know,
welcome to your 50s, man.
My left elbow. Yeah. Sniper's Alley, your 50s. You know, if you can get through the 50s in one piece, you're probably going to be good.
Hopefully.
That's a buddy told me that years ago. I've always remembered that. My left elbow was always hurt. So it's like, you know, I'm sure I have tendinitis already going into this with both arms and just drumming, whatever. My wrists and elbows at times are just killing me. You know, play into the pain and play out of the pain. It's one of those things, you know, it's just whatever. So when this happened, I was like, when I went to get the MRI, I swear I felt like going, just do the left one too. Let me know if this one's going next. Like, let's just get this taken care of. But we'll see. Hopefully my left arm is not gonna betray me quite as bad as the right.
Yeah, man. I wish you luck with that. So basically the biggest change is just, you said just going to therapy. So what's been the biggest change? It's just,
I don't know. I mean, that's the kind of thing, you know, maybe somebody else in my life could tell you. I don't know. I'm just, I think I'm just, the things I'm good at, I'm better at, you know, and my weaknesses have been managed into as much of an obsolete factor in my life as I know how to do.
Right on, man.
You know, focus on what you're good at and let the other stuff drift aside.
And last question, most important lesson that your experience with the CROWES has taught you?
You know, that's another one of those things that any day you ask, I might have a different answer because there's a bunch. I think, you know, the frustrations that I've faced along the way, when I look back, the things that drive me crazy, it's not when I didn't know better. It's when I did know better and ignored myself. You know, there's a lot of times when my gut or my brain or both or my heart or whatever you want to call it was screaming at me that this is wrong or this could be better or this is the solution, either for me or for the band or for whatever. And this could just be in life, in other relationships too. When I have every ounce of my central nervous system is telling me something and I would ignore it because in the moment it was easier to not make waves, or I thought I was being smart by managing a situation as opposed to being honest.
Sure.
When I look back, you know, I don't try to do that anymore. And I think that the biggest thing I learned is if you keep ignoring yourself to keep the peace, you will end up being completely ignored by everybody.
Yeah. Valuable lesson.
It's a very, very slippery slope. You know, Don said something to us when we were working with him about his band Was Not Was. He said, you know, when we got a record deal, a guy at the label said, well, if you just change like 10% of what you're doing, it would be more accessible. And then another guy says, just change this and it's 10% of you. And he goes, you're taking good advice. The guy means well and he knows what he's talking about. But by the time he's given you 10 suggestions, that's 100%. He's changed every one of them is 10%. Suddenly you're not who you are, you know? Yeah. So there's always those lines you have to walk between. You might be looking out for my best interest, but this is damaging advice anyway. You know, are you looking out for yourself? Is this your investment or is this our long-term viability? What are you trying to support here with this decision? An artist gets those suggestions from record companies all the time, and you have to think about what those really mean. And I think in life, you have your own. There were plenty of situations where I made a choice to not pursue what I knew to be a smarter course of action because I knew it would be poorly received. I knew it would not be received. Whatever my thinking was at the time,
sure. I just
went on with it, you know, thinking that loyalty and being a team player, those are great things to have. But when the team's not all together, you're spinning your wheels. And like I said, if you ignore yourself, everyone else will eventually too. So you can't do that. It's better to be wrong it's much better to be wrong than to be silent.
Yeah.
To me, generally speaking. I mean, and there is a time to be silent. There are times when it's really good to just sit and take it all in. But once you've done that, if you stay silent for any reason, in the context of a band anyway, in my situation, those are the mistakes when I look back, the things that the only things that keep you up at night are the things you didn't do, not the things you did.
Hell yeah.
As we said before, you learn from your fuck ups. You don't learn from your successes.
Totally.
And so, looking back, that's what it is. It's like, you just gotta, in Trigger Hippie, in my radio show with my producers or co-hosts or any other project I'm involved in, it is, and I've spearheaded all of those things. I am, if anything, to a fault, too much of a socialist in those regards. It's like, I need to know that everybody's cool. This is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. And if anybody's got an issue, let's talk it out. Let's go. I don't know everything, but I know what I know. So if you got something that I haven't thought of, please, by God, you better put it on the table. I mean, if I've learned one thing, it's that it's way better to go together very slowly than to go really fast in different directions.
Yeah, man, for sure. I think that's being a pretty good leader, actually. I mean, I think it's being smart. I do the same thing.
Well, and my goal is, this is very true. If I'm the smartest guy in the room, I try to get into a different room.
Hell yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I am of no use to any group of people if I'm the smartest one. It's like, no, I do see leadership as facilitation. You surround yourself with great people and let them do what they're good at.
I totally agree, man.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, thank you for everything. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, sure, man.
Let me tell people what you got going on. First of all, if you haven't read the book right here, Steve Gorman, Hard to Handle, The Life and Death of the Black Crows, a memoir. It is now out in paperback, and it is now also in Spanish. So if you want to read the book in Spanish, or if you know anybody who speaks Spanish, it's available. Also, he's in a band, Trigger Hippie, as I mentioned earlier, with a bunch of folks from Nashville. You can check them out at triggerhippie.com. And Steve has a radio show, Steve Gorman Rocks, stevegormanrocks.com. It's on Westwood 1, 7 p.m. to midnight. What do you do on your radio show?
It's a classic rock show, so it's a ton of music. It's 10 songs an hour, which leaves very little actual talking time.
God, that's a lot.
I mean, I tell stories, and it's music, and it's pop culture and sports. It's whatever, it's what's going on, whatever I'm thinking about during the day. And so, I have a lot of stories either about a lot of the artists we play, or I'll tell a story about something I talked to Jimmy Page about. I'll tell a story about me at a dance in 8th grade, whatever occurs to me when the song's playing, something will occur to me, and I'll come out and yap a little bit. And, it's a show. I'm very much just the host of a classic rock show. So if you're into classic rock music, I'm just there it's a 5-hour show every night, 5 nights a week. And we just play a ton of music, and I just keep the thing moving.
You record that live?
Gig.
7 to 12?
What's that?
Do you record that? Are you live when are you like working every night, 7 to 12?
Pre-pandemic, yes.
Holy shit. It's 250 songs, dude, you're working.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work.
It's got to be done, man.
Yeah.
And then we've had a bunch of different, like everything else, the last 6 months has been an exercise in malleability, flexibility.
Yeah.
And so I do it. Now it's recorded. It's recorded just ahead of time. It's as close to live as I can do it responsibly,
right?
Because my segments have to be uploaded and put into place. And, my producer and I it's a long process every day to get the show ready, so that by the time, 7 Eastern hits for the stations on the East and Central to play it live, the West Coast plays it at their own time zones. To put that show into place, it's a lot of work. I am way out of my pay grade to discuss the technicalities of how that stuff works. I don't know.
Putting on a 5-hour show is a lot of work, man. And I know there's a lot of work that goes into that. So that's at stevegormanrocks.com. Again, Westwood 1, Monday through Friday. Anything else you want to promote or talk about?
Not, I'll think of it as soon as we hang up. I'll think of 6 things. So I'm good, man. If you're good, I'm good.
I'm good, man. Thank you for everything. I really appreciate your time. Wonderful book. Again, everybody check it out. Hard to Handle by Steve Gorman. It's an excellent book. Really, really moving story, and some funny shit in there too.
Yeah, right.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, please share it on your social media channels. We appreciate your support. Thanks very much to Steve Gorman for his time. Check out his book and check out his radio show, Steve Gorman Rocks. And most important, man, especially nowadays, keep this in mind. Remember that happiness is a choice, so choose wisely. Be nice, go play your guitar and have fun, or your drums and have fun. Till next time, peace and love, everybody. I am out. Thank you so much, brother.